Backslide by Black K. Cat. Chapter 3. Homecoming. Once, Naruto would have hesitated to call himself Kurama. Might never have even dreamed that he would. But now, knowing what the fox gave up for him to live, understanding the Kyuubi just a bit more from their too brief friendship and Kurama's sacrifice, Naruto wears the name with pride. It's more or less his by right now, so he doesn't truly even think of it as lying. He's never been good at lying. Even his undercover missions tended to involve more half-truths than anything, so he and Sasuke worked out a story with enough semi-truths to let it pass. Uzumaki is gone, all of its records destroyed, and its remaining shinobi scattered to the winds. One more Uzumaki is nothing in the scheme of things, and with this unexpected invitation to Konoha, if he plays his cards right, the first stage of the task is done. Akatsuki have been removed from power. Tobi's cat's paws made powerless. Zetsu is dead, as are the others besides Konin and Nagato, now in hiding, and there are few, if any, other missing-nin at their level. After being told of the future, Nagato was even willing to give up the Rinnegan eyes Madara had implanted, and which are now finally destroyed. It's taken almost a whole year and a great many failed plans, but it's done. It had been a vague thought, somewhere in the middle of all that, to return to Konoha at some point, maybe petition to be allowed to see his young relative. But the Hokage's invitation simplifies everything. He'll be a Konoha shinobi again, though he'd never thought it could happen after his Konoha was raised by Madara. It will even be a whole Konoha, and something in his chest both aches and eases at the thought. Sasuke will be there. A child, perhaps, but there. So will his counterpart in this timeline, and Sakura, and the rest of the Konoha 12. They'll be alive. Incredible. Astounding. Unbelievable, even. But Kurama does believe it. Can't do anything else because his former teacher is waiting for him in front of the gates, hands in his pockets and slouching indolently. One dark gray eye is fixed on him, careful but more at ease than the days previously, and Kurama summons up a smile for the man. Big, is what he says, leaping from the trees and walking up to join him. The biggest Tinin village, Kakashi returns, pride clear in his voice. The Land of Fire might not be the largest, but Konoha has won every war for a reason. He turns and heads through the great gates, sparing a way for the Chunin manning it. Kotetsu and Izumo as ever, and Kurama gives them both a genuine smile, relieved beyond measure to see them both whole. Izumo had died at the gate the last time Madara invaded. They'd managed to evacuate to get out in time, but Kotetsu had never been the same afterwards. When he too died, making a final stand to give several families time to escape a compromised refugee camp, Kurama had been almost relieved. One shouldn't have had to live without the other. Kotetsu looks at him curiously for a moment, even as Izumo calls unhappily, Kakashi-san, I'm taking him directly to the Hokage. Kakashi promises, Uzumaki-san is here on his invitation. Just Kurama. Kurama puts in, dipping his head to the two Chunin. I am younger than you, Hatake-san. Just Kakashi then, Kakashi retorts. In half a moment, he's on the nearest roof, looking down at Kurama expectantly. This way's faster, Kurama-kun. Follow like a good boy. Kurama rolls his eyes, returns Izumo's long-suffering smile, and follows his former teacher up onto the rooftops. The copyman barely waits for him to find his footing before he heads for the Hokage tower. It's deliberate for Kurama to slow his pace slightly, looking around the village he's thought of as gone for years now. It's peaceful. It's beautiful. It exists. And that alone is more than enough for Kurama. Too soon. Far too soon. They're at the academy, and Kurama bemusedly watches Kakashi bounce straight up to the Hokage's window without a thought. Tsunade would have drop-kicked him right back out for using it with a visitor in tow, but apparently the Sandame was far more lenient with the copyman. Still, Kurama is slightly more hesitant as he mimics him and bounces cautiously on the sill to make sure of his welcome. It is fortunate that so long has passed since he landed in this time, because even a few months ago, he would have likely burst into tears at the sight of that wrinkled face under the fancy hat, those sharp, dark eyes taking him in as he hovers there. But he's had a little less than a year to accustom himself to seeing familiar and long-dead faces, places destroyed years past and now untouched. As it is, Kurama slips down to the floor and bows deeply to this man he failed to save once before, genin or not. The Saindame was like a grandfather to him, was the only one who cared for years. And even if Kurama manages to change nothing else in this timeline, he will plant Orochimaru's traitorous head on a stake in the middle of the village for all the world to see. Hokage-sama, he says politely, I am Uzumaki Kurama. Thank you very much for your generous invitation. It is an honor, and I will do my best to make it worthwhile for you. A firm hand tugs him upright, and Kurama follows it, blinking at Sarutobi in surprise. The old man smiles at him, lined face creasing, and Kurama feels something in his chest all but give way. His eyes burn to his horror, and he prays that he isn't about to start crying in front of this man, his very first hero. But Sarutobi simply smiles, kind and gentle, and puts a hand on his shoulder. You must have had a very hard time of it, my boy, he murmurs. I am sorry for your loss. No one has said that to him, ever. There was never really anyone close enough to lose before, and after there were too many to mourn regardless. Kurama ducks his head, lifting his hands to cover his face. He won't let them see him weep. He won't. He can't. Even if he's never managed to grieve properly. Even if Sasuke's loss is still a seeping, bleeding wound in his heart. He doesn't. A strong arm curves around his back, and the Saindame, his first precious person, tugs him a step closer, lets him rest his head on his shoulder, and weep silently. Weak! So stupidly, disgustingly weak! Kurama berates himself, but it's not enough to make him stop. Sorry, he murmurs, fighting the tears. I'm sorry, Hokage-san. No, Sarutobi tells him kindly. Do not be. It is alright to cry when coming home after a long journey. Home is a word that Kurama has not heard in years, since long before Konoha fell for the last time. He laughs a little, pulling back and looking into the Hokage's face with all the gratitude that he feels. It's enough to swamp him, to overwhelm, but it's so sweet at the same time. What he told Kakashi about not finding another village was true. At that point, with Konoha broken, he could have gone to Suna, or Kumo, or Kiri. They all would have taken him, but he hadn't been able to bring himself to seek out a new home, to settle when the only village he'd ever loved was a haunted and ransacked ruin. But here and now, Konoha is well, and if Kurama has his way, it will never, ever fall. It can be a home again, his home again. I would like to stay here, he manages after a long moment of aching wonder at the thought. If you are willing to make a mercenary drifter, a Konoha shinobi, I would devote my life to the well-being of this village in a heartbeat. For the sake of home, he thinks, but does not say. From the smile on Sarutobi's face, he understands regardless. Very well, he says, taking a step back. Normally you would be tested, so I knew what rank to give you, but after capturing 5 S-rank missing-nins, I believe that doing so would be redundant. Sarutobi turns away, giving Kurama a moment to compose himself, and digs through one of his desk drawers. After a few muttered curses, he emerges with a Konoha Hitayate and a stack of forms. Here we are. Once the paperwork is done, you'll be instated as a jonin of Konohagakure, and lodging will be found for you. The red tape and bureaucracy, at least, are still familiar, and Kurama nods, taking both. The hitayate feels heavy in his hand, weighty in a comforting, nostalgic sort of way. He reaches up to remove the uzoshio one he's currently wearing, commissioned here in this time because he had never replaced his battered old Konoha one after the village's fall. Uzoshio was a safe place to claim allegiance with, unconnected to most anything of note, being fallen, and he and Sasuke had chosen it for just that reason. But Kurama thinks Sasuke would understand this change in their plan, this deviation in the name of something they had both longed for. So he lets the Uzushio Hitayate drop to hang limply around his arm, slides the Konoha plate into its place in its thick hair. That feels more like coming home than anything. "A good fit," Sarutobi murmurs, pleased and thoughtful. "Welcome, Uzumaki Kurama. Konoha is honored." Kurama bows again, not as a stranger this time, but as a Konoha shinobi showing respect to his Hokage. "As am I, Hokage-sama. Thank you." He means for far more than the Hitayate or the place. But it doesn't say it, and if Sarutobi understands, he gives no sign beyond a small smile. Hiruzen watches the boy leave, those blue eyes half dazed and rather shaken. He is unmistakably an Uzumaki, what with those chakra reserves and that hair. And Hiruzen wonders if it's weakness not to view him with suspicion. But those tears were real, as was that overwhelming relief at being offered a home. His face was tight with stress that has long since become a way of life, and though he is not of Konoha, the will of fire burns in his tired eyes nonetheless. The Hokage sighs and shifts his pipe to the other side of his mouth, staring out the window at the village as it settles for the night. Kurama was polite enough to leave via the door, and from here, Hiruzen can see his deep crimson hair as he slips through the streets. There's an Anbu following him, of course. Hiruzen is no fool, regardless of what Danzo thinks. But Hiruzen does not believe he will make any trouble. He has seen many lost souls in his years as Hokage, and this boy is one of them. There is grief in him, a great and terrible grief, the kind that can only come with losing everything. It supports his story, shows the truth of his words when others might call him a spy or a fake. Hiruzen blows out a long breath of smoke and asks softly, "Your impression, Kakashi?" The copy-nin is perched in a chair off to the side, waiting patiently. When the Hokage addresses him, he straightens up and puts away his book. "He's not lying," he offers, "and he never made a move against me, even when he didn't know what I wanted with him. I'd say watch him for a month or two, but I don't think there will be a problem." With a small smirk, Hiruzen turns and beams approvingly at his successor's student. "Ah, thank you for volunteering, Kakashi. I was hoping you would. Very well then, off you go. Make sure he gets home safely, Konoha can be quite the confusing place after dark." Kakashi splutters. Hiruzen sweeps out of his office with a smirk, glad he's still able to pull one over on his shinobi regardless of his own age. Or theirs. Victory is sweet indeed. He dreams of pale hands reaching out, of eyes growing dark, of blood spilled across forest floors and splattered garishly over stately tree trunks. "Go," a voice says, and he does. Falls away, spinning and reeling out of one time and into another. "You can change it all," the voice tells, hot, sharp with hope, and something that they will never let themselves call desperation, but which reeks of it nevertheless. Black red eyes and soft black hair and a kiss that steals his breath, steals his heart, takes away all will to leave and go back to the fight that they cannot, must not, will not lose, even though there is no way to ever really win. "Koi," it says, but that's not right. "Dobe," and that's much better. That's what they had. That's what they had. All sharp words and gentle touches, a bond of brothers, and "you're the last, we're the last," entangled souls, and so much more. "Go," Sasuke says again, and when has he ever done anything but obey that particular tone, low with certainty and sorrow? Kurama opens his eyes to stare at the ceiling, breathless with that whispered "go," and breathes out, careful and steady. The sun is rising, the moon setting, and Fox Kurama's sacrifice has left him entirely in tune with such shifts. It's still odd, too, for there to be a moon, though he is grateful. It is a difference to help keep him straight, even when just waking, and he can never forget with it in the sky. It is morning, and outside the window of his new apartment, the village is stirring, coming to life with a sleepy murmur and a hum of energy. There's no way Kurama will be able to keep himself asleep, not in Konoha, so he slides out of bed and dresses quickly. A quick inventory of his weapons pouch reveals that he's running short on both senbon and the paralytic poison he used to take out Kisame. Luckily, the ingredients are native to Konoha. It's one of the concoctions that Genma taught him back when the man was still alive. Kurama is a fair hand at poisons now, though it always leaves an unpleasant taste in his mouth to use them. But shinobi are killers. And while Kurama will be forever hopeful, forever certain that they can also be more, it is their calling first and foremost, and he's long since adjusted to the difference between a hope held heart deep and a naive conviction. He slips out of the apartment on silent feet, pausing at the threshold to slap a paper seal on the door and activate his wards. They go up with a crackle of chakra, not yet fine-tuned, but good enough to last until he takes the time to tweak them. Then he's down the hall and out the window, not bothering with the stairs as he hops out and lands lightly in the dusty street. A passing foreign merchant startles, but the Konoha villains are entirely used to such things and simply smile their greetings. Kurama smiles back, reveling in it, in the sheer life here as he picks a path and starts to wander. 4 streets later, his silent steps gain an echo, and a familiar figure, looking rather more rumpled than the last time Kurama saw him, drops down to walk beside him. Kakashi gives him a sour look, even as he pulls his book out. "Not a night owl, then," he says with weary resignation. Damn. Apparently, this is the man the Hokage assigned to be his babysitter. Kurama remembers hours spent languishing in boredom as a genin, waiting for their instructor to arrive, and grins without an ounce of pity. "Nope," he says cheerfully, sidestepping a cart. "Up with the sun, always." Of course, he's generally up with the moon, too, since he needs far less sleep than a regular human, but he won't tell Kakashi that just yet. Let the man dream and all that. The streets are a familiar maze, and Kurama makes a show of wandering blindly. It's not all for Kakashi's sake, of course, or for the Anbu in the shadows. He's been away from Konoha for years, and even before that he was rarely in the village, always coordinating attacks or defenses, spearheading hit-and-run infiltrations deep in enemy territory. That Konoha had been strange as well, more refugee camp than bustling village, and to see it like this, lively and yet peaceful, is a comfort and a balm on long unhealed wounds. "Here," Kakashi says suddenly, and Kurama barely has time to catch the flak jacket that's tossed at him before it hits him in the head. He arches a brow at the copying, even as he pulls it on and zips it up. A quick roll of his shoulders tests the range of movement it gives him, which seems to be unencumbered. "Thanks!" He smiles at the other man, even as his fingers linger over the Uzushiro spiral stitched into the fabric. He's never worn one of these, actually. Never made it past genin back home. Because by the time he'd done enough to earn a field promotion, everyone already knew him. Knew he was the Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune. And that alone was enough to put him in the bingo book. "Jonin," he thinks, testing out the rank, and smiles. "Jonin Uzumaki Kurama. That's acceptable." "Breakfast," he offers on a sudden whim. "My treat. I dragged you out at dawn, so the least I can do is provide food. Pick a place, Kakashi-san." The copyman looks at him sidelong, careful and considering, and then flips his orange book open and buries his nose in it. He says disinterestedly. "Free food is free food. Why don't you pick?" Kurama rolls his eyes, feeling a sudden surge of nostalgic fondness for this weird and eccentric shinobi. Konoha was never truly Konoha to him after the man's death, and right now, in this timeline, Kurama makes another vow to himself. Orochimaru's head on a pike, and Hatake Kakashi alive, no matter what it takes to do it. Otherwise, he might as well not save the future, because his Konoha would still be dead. Along with the Saidame, Kakashi is family, Kurama's first besides Iruka. Family, precious people, and his Regardless of whether he was able to help them in the other timeline, here he still has the chance and he won't waste it. As they meander, Kurama casts a look up at the Hokage mountain at the 4 faces carved into the stone. It's a bittersweet sight, and not just for the lack of battle scarring and cracks that he remembers in it. His father is up there, and while he loves the man, he knows the story of that night. Minato chose to seal the Kyuubi into him, rather than resealing the fox into his mother and letting it follow her into death. Kurama doesn't hate him for it, but he can't help wondering sometimes just how things would have planned out had Minato made the other choice available to him. It's at the point now where he can't even begin to imagine it, and perhaps that's for the better. With his soft sigh, Kurama tucks his hands into his pockets, shaking his head to clear away such unnecessary thoughts. The sun is coming up, the village is waking, and it's not the time for such things. In the future, perhaps. This is a waiting game now, after all, since Obito will doubtless be coming after him for the destruction of the Akatsuki. But not at the moment. Kurama has just regained his life. He'll take a handful of days to truly live it before he starts breaking it apart again. Kakashi is a faithful shadow, omnipresent porn, or no. He follows Kurama to breakfast and then through the trees as the Uzumaki wanders, always there, always watching, but unobtrusive enough in doing so that Kurama can pretend he's a friend rather than a guard. Kurama is thankful because he needs a friend more than he's willing to admit. Almost a year in this time. Almost a year since Sasuke's death at his own hand, or at Madara's, and Kurama is still grieving. He wonders sometimes if he'll always be grieving, no matter how much time passes. But then he inevitably shies away from that thought because it's too painful. Kurama has always tried to keep his hopes up, to reserve a smile for even the worst of times. But the grief of loss and loneliness is something he knows far too intimately for comfort. However tempted he is, Kurama doesn't immediately head for Ichiraku Ramen to get his second breakfast. That will have to wait for a slightly more socially acceptable hour, given that he's trying to keep a low profile and not arouse suspicion. Instead, he steps past it, ignoring the almost desperate urge to duck inside and see old man Teuchi working behind the counter, Ayame smiling sweetly at their customers. Too many lost. Too many returned, and Kurama's heart doesn't entirely know what to do with this rush of feeling. Happiness and heartache are warring sides of his soul, with neither one giving the upper hand. People in the streets are smiling, laughing, going about their day with no comprehension of what is looming, what was looming, before Kurama took it upon himself to wipe it out. There is still Obito to worry about, but Naruto knows him, knows his heart, and that he can be overcome. His will of fire is still present, still strong, if misguided, even if there is no redemption to be found outside of death. Kurama still has hope for him. Up ahead, with the intersection of 2 streets, a scuffle breaks out. Kurama lifts his head curiously, and even Kakashi flicks his eyes up just in time to see a streak of a brilliant orange come shooting towards them. The Kabunin sidesteps almost idly, clearly used to such happenings, but Kurama stands his ground. Half a heartbeat before he's mowed down, he lashes out, snags the collar of that eye-searing jumpsuit, and lifts his younger counterpart right off his feet. Naruto's feet flail comically in the air for a heartbeat before he realizes what's happened and jerks his head up with an outraged, "Hey!" Kurama winces slightly at the volume so close to his sensitive ears, but raises a brow at the boy with a faint smile. "Careful," he admonishes. "You might hurt someone like that." Naruto crosses his arms over his chest and scowls, clearly attempting to look menacing, and very much failing. "Well, if you can't get out of my way in time, then you're not a very good shinobi," he scoffs. "Ah, but I'm not the only one on the street," Kurama reminds him, finally lowering his arms and setting the boy on the ground. "There are civilians as well, and even if you're a child, you've already started training as a shinobi yourself. That gives you an unfair advantage." That mulish expression doesn't fade. Kurama, knowing very well how stubborn he himself can be, simply rolls his eyes and pats the boy on the head, then steps away. "Just a thought," he says cheerfully, rejoining Kakashi and picking another street at random. "See you around, kid."